Okay. We're recording. It's a nice eclectic series of images tonight. I'm looking at 5 buildings, 2 I know a lot about, and 2 that are on the edges of me having an interest in them. And there's another structure that I don't have the foggiest about, because and the reason why I've taken the risk of looking at a building that I don't know anything about is very much when you think about mansions in Cymru, you are usually brought to their attention by a press article. And the image in front of you was brought to me by a lady that goes around Cymru, and she chronicles different ruins. There's lots of people who go out there now looking at different ruins up and down the Principality. And these ruins can be old mines, they can be old bits of castle, or they can be old bits of chapel. And Bronwydd is one that actually came to my attention about five months ago. And Mel Blues, who's got a YouTube series, she visited this site. And she visited this site only a few years ago, and it was standing like this. The ruins were there in front of you, as you can see them. But unfortunately, all this has now been knocked down. This is all gone in the past 2 or 3 years. And I thought about this evening, and I thought, do I want to look at buildings that are specifically constructed by a family related to the Welsh princes, or some of the lords of the land? And I just thought, no, these are all little capsules of information that tell you about the landscape of Cymru, because they are part of the backdrop. So I've sort of opened this up a little bit. So this site is in Cardiganshire. And for those that don't know, there it is. That's Bronwydd. There's lots of Bronwyds in the area. To me, that looks like it's in Carmarthenshire, but my notes tell me it's in Cardiganshire. And this house itself was constructed in was rebuilt in the 1850s, and there was originally a house there in the 1700s. And the tragedy about lots of these buildings that we see across Cymru is that, you know, after the First World War, you see the likes of Candleston Castle being abandoned. And then you got to about 1962 actually, you see the likes of Dunraven Castle being abandoned. And I'm supposed to be doing manor houses, mansions, and but actually in a mansion house, really, by the time you look at it in the 1960s. And Candleston was a mansion house when you look at it in 1914, 1918, that type of time. And there's lots of buildings like that dotted up and down the country. I'm not going to be right in saying that there's many mansions, manor houses as there is castles. I'm not going to be right in that. But they're a substantial relic of past peoples, past influences on the landscape. And if you want to talk about great influences on the landscape, you know, you could look at the various great mansions that are being constructed today. It's sort of part of the evolution of the landscape. So Bronwydd itself, it was a Gothic-y looking castle, you know, the typical Gothic-y looking castles, and the interiors were splendid. As we'll see 1 or 2 views of other buildings, the interiors are splendid, with painted mottos, wonderful wooden doors, a profusion of carved stone. There's lots of carved stones in these buildings, and stained glass windows, mural paintings. And, you know, this was a house associated with the Lloyd family. And like lots of these buildings, you constantly hear that lots of these buildings, due to death duties, the families are unable to keep them going. This building's associated with the Lloyd family. And then to keep up with the death duties, they've got to rent them out, or then they're being used in the wars. For example, Bronwydd, as a little snippet, was being used in the Second World War. But we do actually find reports about mansions in Cymru that are used in the First and Second World War. Afterwards, they're in a right state, simply because the army's been in there, various officers, they're not maintained over the periods of the wars, and then the families really don't want to go in there. And after 1945, this building was completely stripped of all of its finery, you know, the tapestries and all those wonderful things. And just a strange fact, before we actually go on to the one that I really want to do today, which I haven't even intimated which building that is, but it's in the Vale of Glamorgan. This structure itself still had a roof on most of it in the 1980s. So sort of in my lifetime, in the 1980s, this, you know, this could be recovered. But today, you do not see any of that, because I think it's in 3 years ago that was all pulled down, which is the tragedy of Bronwydd and lots of other similar buildings across the Principality. Now, Del, you will have been to Llantrithid Place, surely, to God.
I know where it is, but I've never been there.
Del, you know, on your journeys to Cardiff, why aren't you making an effort?
Yeah, I could do.
I tell you what, Del, there's lots of trips that you need to come on when we get out and about with Rosamond. We'll give you a quick call and say, me and Rosamond are going to Llantrithid Place. Are you available to come up with us? So this I wanted to sort of introduce this thing today about the mansions today with an obscure site like Bronwydd in West Wales, and I want to then look at Llantrithid Place. Now, I'm an archaeologist that's actually worked at Llantrithid Place. It's a wonderful mansion. It's in the title of this lecture today, the Mansions of Cymru, and I personally know a lot about the site because I've surveyed the site, I've done field walking there, I've worked with the owners of the site, so I understand it. It sort of beats within me. Llantrithid Place, you could say, is a ruin beyond repair. But one thing that Llantrithid Place does have is a very interesting landscape. And an interesting landscape that not only adorns our past, is a landscape that is very fitting with another site that we're going to be looking at, Aberglasney, actually. It's a landscape that had ornamental gardens. It's smack bang in a world of a deer park, and we see this site with its origins, which are very early. From my research, we know that Llantrithid Place was a seat to a local lord, probably going all the way back before the Norman conquest. And if you do get an opportunity to go around this place, Llantrithid Place, quite an irony there, get permission from the Hanks family and also take a hard hat with you. It's one of those things that I know Ellen doesn't like wearing, but it's a place that you need to wear a hard hat. And when we were recording this site in the 1990s, about 1995, there was a lot more to see then. And what I'm going to say quickly, just get it out the way, is I'm going to get. Do you know what, Del? I would like to do some drawing, so let's get my little drawing thing up. You know I like my little drawing, don't you? So this is a perfect one. When Llantrithid Place initially had a wall running across here, This projected outwards, and this was a porch area, and there was the roof line ran across here, and then the roof line ran again across here, and then what you then see is over about here you have another wing which is just off the image, and there was a lot more of that wing still standing when I first started recording the site in the 1990s. And Del, it's amazing that I actually had a mobile phone in 1995, and I was the only one I knew had a mobile phone. This is how old this is, and it was classed as an Elizabethan manor house. It was shaped like an E. So if you can imagine, you've got the one arm of the E there, the capital letter, and another arm at the bottom. And it was basically shaped very much like an E, with a wing coming down here, and that coming in here, coming like that. And then what we have then, we got that there, and there was a little nib of a porch here. And that porch came out and it came across. So it's typical Elizabethan E. So it's a wonderful site to actually get to know. And one thing I got to know was actually the gardens there. And whenever I take people here, I'm not really interested in the house. I actually take them into the gardens. We do know a lot in the history and also in the archaeology from some of the work I've done, that in an antiquarian stroke archaeologist, a chap by the name of G.T. Clark, who's archiving and recording lots of the manor houses in the area. Naturally, this would more or less look fairly complete with a cave roof in 1867. And he says that the position of the house on ground sloping towards the south was favourable for the construction of terrace gardens, and full advantage seems to have taken of this. The ground to the north, falling towards the house, is retained by a wall, and terrace towards the west again of the house, the middle platform is retained by another wall. So what he's doing, he's describing, he's surveying, he's understanding this landscape. Even in its neglected state, in the 1860s, you could still find some of the original plants that had been planted there, very mature, may I add, that had been planted there in the 1500s. So we're talking about the late 1500s that this house comes into its own. We're talking about the Bassett family and its association with this site in the late 1500s. And then you talk about the Aubreys, and then you talk about the Mansells. And there's another story to say about the Aubreys, but I would like to say that if you want to go further into Llantrisfydd Place, you need to go to another site in the Vale of Glamorgan, castle stroke mansion, Beaupre, Old Beaupre, because the Bassets are the builders at Old Beaupre, and then you got New Beaupre, which is another lecture altogether. So this is the image that you can actually see from the road. And up until about 2003 or somewhere like that, Archaeology Company actually had big chunks of the carved stone from the house, until we had a knock on the door from the Hanks family saying, we've got somewhere secure to put these stones now. And naturally we handed the stones over. But the problem is, what happens with buildings like this in the lower courses is that people have a tendency to nick the really fine dressed stonework, and there would have been more windows along here, which are now gone. And all this was collapsing, so people would go to the site and steal it, which is a bit of a shame, really, because it weakens the structure. And when I was doing a survey there, big chunks of the structure, there were big cracks through the wall. And, you know, we used to estimate that within about 20 years, a large chunk of this site would have collapsed. Lucky that my estimations were completely wrong. And when we sort of talk about this now very neglected, almost obsolete, completely walled garden area, we can, in the notes back to G.T. Clark's time, he mentioned that the formal garden and the landscape had sort of survived, and he talks about bee bowls. And anyone knows about bee bowls, they're hives for bees, and obviously Ellen's going to be interested in that. The stone-built bee bowls in sort of niches in the wall. So there used to be a couple of these around, which in my survey and work, we didn't actually find them. So towards the back, towards the south, what you do find with the estate are these large rectilinear fish ponds. But before we actually talk about that, I've got a little bit of a sort of aerial view at the end that we can sort of look a little bit more about that. If you do go to the church today, this is what you see directly looking at you from the church, with the church behind you. So this is what you're seeing. It's one of the tallest gable ends of the building still standing, and there's ivy all over it. There's bits of window and so on. And we also know a lot, not only through recording and G.T. Clark. We also know about the building because the Aubrey family wrote extensively about the site. So after the Bassets, the Aubrey family writes about the site. So what we see associated with the Aubrey family through their accounts, they tell us that they've got nectarines planted around the estate, nectarine trees planted around the estate. They got lots of cherry trees by about the 1630s. And they've got a summer house, which they've got established, which I'll actually show you where it is. And what it is, what we have is that the church is in front of you. So you look at this and you've got a wall that, the boundary wall of the church graveyard is part of the house wall. So this runs all the way through, and then it keeps going, and then it keeps going south all the way to this building that I mentioned, the summer house, all the way at the bottom, and it's an Italianate walkway. This is, to me, the Italianate walkway is the most important thing about this site, because what we were finding, and we've got fragments of them in the studio in Barry, we've got some of the remains of the Italianate flower pots. What they would do along the wall, they had these huge flower pots, these massive flower pots, big enough to put you in, Del, right? So these, which they don't need to be that big then, Del, but these big flower pots, and what they used to plant in these flower pots were not just the cherry trees and the nectarines and so on, alongside the statues that they had in sort of a walkway, a promenade running all the way to the summer house. But they had these huge pots, and they actually had sycamore trees planted in them. So sycamores in the 1700s were ornamental trees. And there's a sycamore tree, that's a branch from. I haven't got an image of this, but it's in our record somewhere. But that sycamore tree itself, it's such an old sycamore tree that the tree itself has enveloped some of the stonework of the wall, so you can actually see stonework which have moved up in the tree into the boughs of the tree. The stonework has moved up, and it's sort of hidden in the girth, and it's amazing to see this, and it shows how old this tree is. It was in a big pot once. So, and I'm very aware that I can't spend all night doing land truthing, but very, very interesting subject. Anyway, moving on. More images of land truthing coming up. That is looking from the Italianate walkway. And actually, Dale, I don't know if it's showing, but can you see the stonework in the tree? Can you see it?
Mm-hmm. Not in this picture.
Right. Okay. It's moved on. I don't know if I move that up a little bit. Sort of move that up. Let's sort of enjoy this image. So Del, can you see the stones there now?
Yes.
3 stones. That's what I'm describing.
Yes.
It's such an old sycamore tree, and that was in a little pot once, probably dating to about the 1630s, or I had to date from the 1630s for a reason, because the Civil War is coming, and the Aubrey family sort of, things started to change after the Civil War, and by about the 1700s, things started to rapidly change. But that is the Italianate walkway from the house. You've got the house in front of you. So if you turn your back to the house, right, and you then walk towards the summer house, and it's a beautiful, as you're looking around, you've actually got a beautiful vista. And if we sort of, the tragedy of this house is that when I last went there, I think I went about 5 years ago, children had been using this as a rope swing. And you can imagine what's going to happen. And you can see all the beautiful stonework here, which is actually collapsed from the window above. And using this as a rope swing is a very, very foolhardy thing to do, because the whole thing's going to cave in on you. Some other sort of little bit of details that sort of that bring to my mind is actually looking at that we do actually have some render on the walls still. The whitewash on the walls, which is quite interesting that this has actually survived, because it's quite sheltered over here as well. And if you look inside the building, you can actually see other arches, and there's actually another floor. So this is, because of the levels, and this is slightly raised to go along the walkway, there's so much to see at this house. And you can actually, if you go from the church side and you actually look over the wall, you can actually see a little bit of this, if you take a little bit of a ladder with you. And I don't think anyone's going to blame you for doing that at all. Again, looking from the side of the church, and this is G.T. Clark, and an illustration of what he believed the inside of this looked like in the 1700s. So what you've got the fireplace with the coat of arms of the Aubrey family on it, and it's just sort of the wonderful bosses and the wonderful painting, and this would have all been woodwork inside, and this overlooks the porch. So if you look towards that way, you would actually look towards the porch, and you look into the courtyard area with the ornamental fountain and all the rest of it. And one thing I failed to mention is that when I was field walking at the site in this was 1996, when we were field walking, we were picking up little bits of glass in the field, really fine bits of glass, and we thought these are bits of light bulb. Anyway, we took them back, and they turned out to be tiny, really, really fine glass goblets from the 1600s, and we were finding them in the field whilst we were field walking. Unfortunately, because of when they were bagged, and when we were archiving them, the glass itself was inevitably destroyed, which is a bit of a shame, really. But that's the course of time, and you wouldn't find anything else like that in the field today. However, when we were field walking in that field as well, to give you an idea of the history associated with Llantrithid Place, what we also found was lots of medieval pottery. So we know that this wasn't circumstantially people saying that this is, this is possibly a medieval site. We know it's a medieval site. And whenever I've looked at this image, I've actually always believed that the proportions are wrong. I actually think that the people in here are actually too small. And the reason why I'm saying that is it just doesn't look right. But this for me is a nice reconstruction, because looking out of that window there, you would look out over to the roadway, and that's the roadway that then you look back into and you actually see the ruins. So this side is, on the outside of this, is the corner that you would first see from the road by the telephone box. So that gives you an idea. So when you go there, you can get an idea what it looked like inside. Moving on. Now, I like this, and there's a bit of regret with what I'm looking at, because you know, we've lost, and I'll tell you what we've lost. The bit of regret is that when we were there, we didn't take enough photographs, because that building's gone. This is that sycamore tree, and the heights of the walls are much taller, more windows, and I think this image is probably dated to sometime in the 60s, 1970s, somewhere like that. So we've lost quite a lot, and we're losing a lot from this building all the time. If anyone wants to ask me and say, you know, why hasn't anyone actually you know, bought this site? Why hasn't anyone made an effort to try and conserve the site? And the answer is that somebody in about 1985 offered the family £600,000 to buy the site, to turn it into a hotel, which would have been absolutely brilliant, because it would have preserved the walls. But it wasn't enough money, and now we've lost big chunks of the site because of the greed of the landowners, because they didn't accept the money there and then, and the site is just falling into oblivion. Now, this is interesting. I just wanted to show you this quickly. This is inside the church of Llantrithid, and it says, "Here lies the bodies of John Bassett, Esquire, and Elizabeth, his wife." And it then talks about Sir Rhys Mansell of Margam. So we've got the link there directly, that we've got the and then you've got Thomas Aubrey mentioned there as well. So when you think about the site, there's links with the Bassett family, the builders. You've got the Aubrey family, the Mansell family. Whenever I was giving talks about the site, I would always mention those two families and their association. The three families and their association with the site. No, I didn't want to mention it, but there's lots of ghost stories associated with this site, and it's a very spooky landscape. This church itself, I'll just tell you something quickly. One of my little foibles, anecdotal stories. When I actually gave a talk at Llantrithid Place this time, this was with my mobile phone. This was 1995. I had a load of notes written about Llantrithid Place, and as I'm smoothing a goat alongside me, the goat eats all my notes. So then when everybody turns up, it says, "I can't tell you anything about Llantrithid Place because the goat has eaten my notes." And do you know what, Del? Not a single person believed me. So anyway, this is a church, and you can actually see the view, the church building. That's the view we're talking about. And do you know what? We've got two aerial views which I want to sort of look at now. And the next place we're going to look at is actually Aberglasney. So I'm just going to one of my things is sort of a bit of a love for the site. I actually applied for funding once to actually buy this site, but it never came to anything. And this is actually the walled garden. So along here, the walled garden goes. And actually, for me, the Italianate walkway runs all the way along something like this. Goes all the way there. And then what we need to then do is we need to add some water. And let me remember this. I'm trying to work out which side the water is actually on. I think the water is this side, and you've got a nice little bridge surviving, and the water goes up here. And what you do find is that this is another one of the, oh, wrong color. This is another one of the walled gardens. So there's one here, and this goes all the way up here, something like that. And there's another load of walled gardens, which I've never been able to work out how far back they go, but it's something like this. And then this actually goes up here. And this is very much the estate. And then if I want to draw in the rest, you've got this building here, and it comes in nicely along there, and that goes along there, and that goes, and then at one point this came out along here, and it's something like that, bit of a cocky angle. And in this area as well, there was actually there's actually a building there, and there's another building there, and there's another building there, and another building here. So those are all the outbuildings. But for those that are interested in a far more deeper history, well before a native medieval manor, what is also of interest is at the back here is actually a ring work. And sorry, that's a really bad, but there's a ring work at the back there. And what we then find is that later on, to build the house, what they've done, they've quarried out all this area. So this is a big quarry, and this is the stone that they actually used to build the house. So you know, I do know this site really well, and when we have gone there, we've really gone to town on understanding what we're seeing. And then you've got a final map, another little map. There you are looking down a little bit more detail at the estate. And I didn't, and there you go. You've got the walkway there. You've got another wall there. And if you're lucky, you can go over a little bit of a bridge there. And that there is the summer house. So that's my take on Llantrithid Place. I know that was quite short. Well, it's not short considering that's probably dominated the lecture today. But I wanted to, looking at mansion houses, I really wanted to do that one for a place that I do know quite a lot about. So the next site I'd like to do is go to Aberglasney, that you can actually see on the map there. There's Aberglasney. And I'm very grateful to Ellen for always suggesting that I have maps in my lectures, and they're very useful. Because if I didn't, I'm sure some of you wouldn't have the foggiest where most of these places were. Now, Aberglasney is a really nice building and a nice set of gardens, because it was only in the 1980s that Aberglasney House and the gardens were in an excessively ruinous state. And it was in the 1980s that they saved the estate. Do you know, I really wanted to show you some archaeological images tonight. I really wanted to show you some images of the archaeological excavations, but I will describe it. The reason they're able to redesign the gardens is because when the archaeologists were excavating, they found the beds, the actual beds of the flower beds, and they actually found some of the root systems as well, some of the really old, because as some of you know, roses can grow quite some length of time, and they develop really deep root systems. And the archaeologists were actually excavating all this, and I actually thought that was absolutely fascinating. I've never actually, I've been to Aberglasney twice, but I've never really explored all of it or allowed myself to go and look around it. But it's an absolutely fascinating place. And if anyone ever wants to go to Aberglasney, why not visit Droesloin Castle, and why not visit Carreg Cannon Castle at the same time? And when we went to Droesloin, Aberglasney is just down the road, so it was great. It's a site of 3 locations that you can do, and I do believe that Ellen was actually with me on that trip. So again, if we move on, now look at all that. And this is overlooked by the house. So the house is actually looking down on this. And, you know, when they were excavating, they found lots of the cobbles as well. So not only were the archaeologists excavating the flower beds, they were excavating the cobbles, and it was absolutely fascinating to see this on television, because in the 1980s, naturally, I was one of these that was always told that archaeology was just about the Romans and the medieval period and the prehistory. I didn't really understand that archaeology could actually be about industrial archaeology. But the main thing is, there was a revolution going on. And the revolution going on as well, they were also excavating Bersham in Wrexham. They were having excavations at Bersham, and that was to sort of excavate an iron foundry building site. And it's almost as if the 1980s was the period when people started to become interested in industrial archaeology. And thank goodness for that, because if they hadn't have excavated this site, and if they had have allowed this site to fall into disrepair, we wouldn't have the great gardens that we see at Aberglasney today. It makes archaeology useful, and it makes archaeology relevant, because what we do see when we look at something like Chirk Castle, which is a very grandiose manor house, again up by Wrexham Way, when Llangollen actually, when we look at Chirk Castle, the archaeologists are now excavating at Chirk Castle, and they've excavated a ha-ha. And basically what a ha-ha is, it's a wall that overlooks the landscape, and behind the ha-ha, the level's built up. So you can look over the landscape, but the people can't look in on you. That's what a ha-ha is. The level is the height of the wall inside, and then outside it's a low level. So they've excavated a ha-ha at Chirk. And again, they're starting to think at Chirk, as part of their re-landscaping, that they can do something similar to what you've got at Aberglasney, because it's in the archaeology that we really start to understand more about the landscape. And do you know what? In my massive enthusiasm, I didn't tell you enough of what I wanted to say about Llantrythid. But I'm going to mention that in this context with Aberglasney, where you've got somewhere like Llantrythid Place, and you're starting to see a decay and collapse of the Llantrythid Place landscape, where you start to see the greenhouses falling by the wayside and the walled gardens starting to fall by the wayside and all the rest of it. Aberglasney is starting to flourish, it's starting to become a great site. But like Llantrythid, if Aberglasney had been left, it will have eventually turned out like Llantrythid, where we would lose the sense of context with the past. And naturally, lots of the more mature trees within the hinterland behind the house, and some of the other plants have seemingly been there for a long time in uninterrupted. I just look at these little features. They haven't reconstructed everything at Aberglasney. What they have done is you go back to the house, and you look at these cellar type structures, and they've done a real good job of reconstructing that. And if you look a great deal down at the floor around this area, lots of this is contemporary with the original time that Aberglasney is in use. And just a little bit of information about Aberglasney. And here we go. So Aberglasney comes into its own in a far distant time. We do know that the likes of Aberglasney and the history associated with Aberglasney might go all the way back to Hywel Dda, and Hywel the Great. So, you know, the site itself steeps at the real links with the landscape of Cymru itself. what we do see is a building of a great sense of age. So what we do find in 1603, we start to see the site coming into its own. The Civil War interrupts. The Civil War interrupts what the Aubrey family is doing at Llantrithid as well. So there's another link. The Aubrey families sided with the king. So what that meant is that there was deterioration at Llantrithid. They revived the gardens at Llantrithid, but eventually by the end 1800s, it's almost ruinous. But the same thing didn't happen with the likes of Aberglasney. Even though they sided with the crown, the site remained in the hands, and again, it's rebuilt in the 1720s again. So you see around the site lots of changes and lots of rebuilding, and then it comes into its own in the 1800s. But like many of these sites, they're very much affected by change. They're very much affected by maintenance. Lots of these buildings, lots of the mansion houses that we think about suffered because at the end of the First World War, all the way across Britain, this is at the end of the First World War, lots of those gamekeepers, lots of those gardeners were now dead. The owners of these buildings weren't as wealthy as they had been before. Lots of the buildings were being abandoned and so on. And like Aberglasney, by about 1977, the building was in real trouble. Aberglasney was in real trouble. And the owners of the structure at Aberglasney were basically told that, and the Welsh office actually stepped in. They said, if you don't preserve this site, you're going to be prosecuted. So, you know, we've got the archaeological excavations then from then onwards and the surveying. And you've got a discovery that the history is actually bearing out truth, because the archaeological excavations are actually coming up with remains that actually date to the 1200s. So it's not just like Llantrithid. It's not just in the little notes in the history. It's actually borne out in the archaeology as well. So this is another site I'd like to go to. This is one that we wanted you to go to. This is a site known as Hafondunus Hall. Hafondunus Hall. Now there's a bit of a success story associated with Hafondunus Hall, and for those that have never heard of this site and don't know where it is, let's try and put it on the map. There's Hafondunus Hall. It's near Llanrwst, Denbighshire, Colwyn. Hafondunus is within the heart of that oldie-worldy land of North Wales. And we couldn't do mansions without visiting North Wales. Again, a Gothic-y looking building. And this is fairly new, really, in the senses of Aberglasney and Llantrithid. This was actually built in 1861, replacing a house that had once existed that was built in 1674. But there's a bit of a success story associated with this. After 2004, new owners took over the site and they started restoring it. So, you know, we've got a bit of a success story. And so that's Hafondunus. And if we look at some more images, this is what they're looking like. This is what it's looking like today. Now, I know in the break, not in the break, at the end, there's going to be one or two of you saying, well, you know, why haven't you looked at Ham Manor? Why haven't you looked at Dunraven? Why haven't you looked at this? And I'm just thinking, well, I just wanted to give you an overview. And for those that like controversy, Hafondunus Hall was linked to the slave trade and the merchant Samuel Sandbach, and who bought the estate in 1830. So I know that the trade in slaves was over and done with in 1807, but from the money that was occurred. This estate was actually bought, and I hope people don't go up there, start smashing it up, because it's got a link with slavery. But this is again a rare building now, because lots of those really nice buildings like Bronnoedd Hall that once existed a decade ago and 2 decades ago with a roof on them have been allowed to fall down or have been compulsory purchased and demolished. But, you know, you can just think of going down the steps there. I know it's the 1800s, but again, you know, these types of mansion houses follow the same format and the same formula. I don't know if any of you have ever been up to Belsover. When I went to Belsover, there's a really nice mansion house there, and it's really, really eerie. And that was used in the 1800s. And by the time you get to the 1900s, there's been a fire, or these people have been these buildings have been allowed to go to rack and ruin. And this is the thing, when you look at somewhere like Dunraven Mansion House, Dunraven Castle, when you look at that, it was a beautiful building in the 1960s. It had a roof on it, it had ornate gardens, it had an arboretum, it was still being used in 1962, and it's a great shame that it was then demolished because nobody wanted to take it on board. And even though there's lots of these, and they're buildings associated with the rich and the wealthy, they still have an important message to tell us about our past. And this is quite an extensive mansion with its own little tower in the back, but little bits of it did survive. And from this, they've got scaffolding up, and they're hoping to get the building up and running as a private house. That would be absolutely brilliant. So even though the building was gutted in 1904, it was eventually sold. 1904, 2004. It was eventually sold in 2010, and since that moment, they've been gradually, slowly but surely, restoring it. And it's one of those mansion houses you can actually see the greenhouses and stuff there, which is absolutely fab. And looking inside, whoa! I think that's inside the glass house. If we can sort of zoom in on that a little bit more. Can we zoom in? Yeah, I think so. That's the glass house there. Sort of looking into it, getting an idea of what's going on. So what I would like to do now is moving on from my images. I'm going to probably try and screen share something that I got on my computer. So we can bear with me a minute. Now, this is a rather interesting one. For this one is, I don't know if I can get this back on my notes. Okay, all right, hang on. I just gotta do something with my computer a minute. Gotta get my notes up there. Hang on. Apologies, Del. So, Del, have you which of the ones have you actually seen of these tonight?
Aberglasney.
You've seen Aberglasney. You haven't been to Llantrithid Place. You haven't seen Half Donos, and the one thing about Bronnoedd, if you type Bronnoedd into YouTube, there's an absolutely there's a brilliant video about it, and the building that we're going to actually look at now, some people will be aware of. So what we're going to do, this is actually Clouth Manor, not this one. Hang on, my slides have gone too far. Hang on a minute. Right, good. This is actually Clouth Manor, and this is mansion. It's a rather interesting one, fairly more modern. But this is this is how these buildings come into consciousness. So what we've got headline news. This dates back to 2018. So hang on a minute. I do apologize, people. I seem to have lost what I wanted to do. Bear with me. Hang on, bear with me a minute. I've got to do something. I got a press report in front of me that I actually want to read out to you all. Oh God, hang on a minute. I seem to have lost what I want to read out to you. Now, this is when we think about mansion houses, the one thing that springs to mind is those headline news in newspapers. And I'm going to sort of try and screen share this on here without a huge problem. Cloud Manor. This is with the Celtic Manor estate, actually. And you may have actually seen it in the newspapers in 2018. Headline news: inside the mansion, inside the abandoned mansion house, left untouched. Another headline news: the empty and abandoned building of Newport. Eerie mansions now ruined and abandoned since their lavish owners left. Clouth Farm near Killeen has been abandoned for decades. Loads of these types of headlines. So what I'm going to try and do is get this one back up and share it with you. That's inside this mansion house. And in the Vale of Glamorgan, there's a place known as Began Farm, which looks a little bit like a mansion house. And so if I read this one out, and this is actually a story from 2019. And my technology seems to be failing me tonight, which I really do apologize for. Hang on a minute. It's slowing down. Just bear with me, please. Had you come across this one at Clouth Manor, Del?
No.
Right, so here we go. Headline news. Clouth Manor. Clouth Farm in Killeen was built more than 100 years ago and boasts picturesque views of the River Usk. And back to this image. Clouth Farm Manor in Killeen appears to have remained in the hands of the Clean family for decades. By the 1950s, the house is believed to have been owned by a certain Cecil Lean, who served as a colonel during both World Wars. And the news tells us, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually share this on the screen, so bear with me, Del. It's really slow tonight for some reason. So I'm going to go back on the screen, and I'm going to try and share this. We can look at an article. It's rather important to sort of look at this article because I wanted to sort of demonstrate the fact that lots of these places come to mind only when you see them in the media. They're hidden out there. Oh, right, okay. Del, what are you seeing in front of you now?
It's waiting to come up.
Okay. I do apologize, folks.
No, something about a dating site.
Oh, that's for you, Del. Right. So again, this is what I want to show you. Demonstrating. Headline news, 2019. Clouth Farm near Killeen has been abandoned for decades. Little manor house. These picturesque images capture the glory and tragic reality of one of Gwent's most enchanting buildings. Clouth Farm in Killeen was built more than 100 years ago and boasts picturesque views of the River Usk. And you're thinking, why is this relevant? But it's still history, it's still archaeology. The house appears to have remained in the hands of the Lean family for decades. So we've already done that bit. So look at that there. It's like one of those weird, there are loads of buildings like this across Wales. In the newsletter, Michelle's done a review of a book about Gwydir Castle, which is basically a mansion house. We looked at Gwydir a few weeks ago, and that was bought by a couple that was driving around Wales looking for old buildings to do up, and they found a mansion house very similar to this one. Upon his death, the building was sold by auction in 1979. In the 1988 edition of the Healthy Holiday Guide, it contained the following: this beautiful Edwardian farmhouse, set on 19 acres of hillside in the peaceful Vale of Usk, is self-confessedly cluttered within and without. Its exterior bristles with folly-like projections, including a round turret, numerous dormer windows, and porches galore. In 1995, Clouth was up for sale again and bought by the Celtic Manor. The South Wales Argos approached the Celtic Manor to confirm their ownership of the site and to ask whether they had any plans for this beautiful structure. It's saying that Susie Lloyd, who lives in Killeen, said, "My mother used to talk about the house all the time when she was alive." And the whole point of actually showing you this is that sort of typical thing that comes in the newspapers, buildings that you don't know anything about. And this is why we've come up with this one to end the lecture, to sort of say, well, you know, look out for these buildings surrounded by trees that nobody has loved and wanted for many generations. And it's sad when we look at the likes of Llantwit Major and going back to Ham Manor, that being used in the First World War, that eventually being demolished, and the Ham Estate being placed there, and it's still got the ornamental gardens there. And I'm sure we could all think about various buildings across the Principality, and I think it's not so much that that these buildings are unloved. I think it's the fact that they would cost a lot of money to do lots of them up. And not only do we have mansions and manor houses across Cymru, what we do find, we find lots of old hospitals, you know, the old asylums and so on. So those are really important to our history as well. And those types of buildings are being lost. And it's good to get out there and actually see these buildings before they're lost forever. So what I'm going to say, Del, have you got any questions about this tonight?
No, that was really good. It's interesting because there's quite a few around the Bridgend area, and there's one that I know of which doesn't exist anymore in Sarn Villa.
Yes.
All that's left now, Wall. But yeah, it's to look at old maps and see some of these things and then what's there now. It's really interesting. And
you know, when I came across Bron Eve, it was because I was on the internet, and I've got this friend on there called Mel Blues, and she said, "Oh, I've just visited this site, and look at an old video I've got from like a few years ago. This is what it looked like." And I thought, "Oh wow, that's really nice." And she said, "This is what it looks like now. All it is a gateway." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, so this? Oh, hang on a minute." And she said, "Oh, this was only demolished 3 years ago." And you're thinking, oh, so this building in front of you is actually still there, this one, but the one at Bron Eve isn't. And when you think about the sense of compulsory purchase, you know, these buildings are the vulnerable ones. These are those buildings that that, you know, can be very dangerous. And these are those buildings that people like to go into and set light to them and all those terrible things. And when that's happened, you know, it's a bit too late. And I think it's a great shame when we think about Llantrythid Place, that could have been saved in the 1980s. But the owners, they chose not to sell it, meaning that now nobody's going to want to buy it and do it up because there's not enough of it around for people to restore, which is a great shame. But with this one at Hafodynus in North Wales, I think that's great that they're actually restoring that. It's great that they've they've done that with Aberglasney. And it's a shame that, you know, one day Llantrithid Place will fall down, because what you see with Llantrithid Place, with these walls that you see with Llantrithid Place, and I'll just like to finish again with Llantrithid Place. So it's what we see with Llantrithid Place. Why did they abandon Llantrithid Place? It was because the families lost interest in Llantrithid Place. It wasn't for want of money. Obviously, the Bassets moved away, and the Aubrey family lost interest. It was probably in its locality, but you know what we do see is the great remnant of that garden in the form of the sycamore tree still standing today. And usually when I do go there, I actually take people to see the missing objects in the landscape, because what they've got there's a hooded well, and there's also a beautiful building from the 1600s that was used as an ice house. There's actually an ice house on the estate, but you've got to be with me to know where to find it, because it's a big secret. But these are two really nice buildings, and it's well worth a visit in the summer months, which we're in now, but it'll have to be next year until we visit it again. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to the mics, and we're going to stop screen sharing, hopefully. Right, here we go. And we're all back. Put everybody's mics on. Unmute everybody. So everybody's now with us. Right, so Peter, what would you like to say?
Oh, no, I found it good. That place down by down the Vale there, I would love to go and have a look at that.
It's well worth a visit. Yeah, it is. It's absolutely spectacular. Yeah, that's what it used to look like. I've become fascinated by the building.
I've been to Beaupre in the past, but is there anything left at Beaupre? Actually,
they've been New Beaupre is actually used as a farm today, and the house is still at New Beaupre. Old Beaupre is still there. And what they've started to do, there's one or two rooms inside the house that you can actually go into. And they actually they do weddings in there and so on. But unfortunately, it's a schedule. Right, the difference is between this building, Llantrithid Place, and Old Beaupre, is that Old Beaupre is a scheduled ancient monument. This is a listed ancient monument. It doesn't have the same protection as a scheduled ancient monument. And Old Beaupre about 15 years ago, the whole estate was sold, and it went for 600 grand. And I think a few years ago it was up for auction, and that went for about 1.5 million. So
it was about 30 odd years ago that I went there.
You could have probably bought it yourself, Pete. Right, Pam, anything you'd like to say?
No, just Dunraven, Mansion and Castle another time.
I think Dunraven will. I think there's so much more we could have explored tonight, but obviously in an hour you can't. But I think very much Dunraven is a site that we could look at again, and we could look at Llantrithid Place again. Gillian,
did you say Llantrithid is owned by the Hanks family?
Yes.
Because our milkman is William
Hanks.
Yeah. Would it be the same one? Same family?
I think it is. I think it is. I think it was John Hanks was either the father or the son, and now the father's giving it over to his son, so it's the farm. But I think it's got to be the same family. Yeah.
So
go on.
How did you get permission to go in and see it?
Well, we knocked on the door one day and said, "Can we do some field work and record the place?" And they said yes. But that was years ago. I think they don't stop people wandering around it, but I think it's best to ask permission. And, there is actually a footpath that you can actually use And the footpath goes actually past the house. But you know, this is what some people do. They use their right to go on the footpath and they just wander into the house. But I wouldn't advise that.
No. Thanks, then. No, it
Not
looks
for-
good.
Not for the Hanks family, simply because you know, they got cattle in there and all sorts of things, and it's quite a dangerous site. Thank you, Goff.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you very much, Scott. Very good.
I should have done more actually. Ellen.
Yeah, Llantrithid looks lovely. It'd be nice to have a walk out there with you and that. Beaupre, they pronounce it Booper, and in the old place, in the stream, there's all watercress.
Yeah, there is.
I don't know if that was deliberately planted or just a wild natural addition. Like,
Actually, those are two things. Booper, Beaupre, all those different things. People call it loads of different things. And somebody gave it another name as once because they couldn't pronounce it. It was old Boopy or something.
yeah, Booper.
Booper, that's the one.
Yeah.
Booper.
That's what I said.
There's loads of different ways of looking at that one. Rosamund, what would you like to say?
Oh, I just think it's a shame to see these old places sort of go to rack and ruin, but I suppose money, maintenance, you know, these big places take a lot to preserve, but it's such a shame to see them go, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
You can imagine how they once were in all their former glory. But,
Yes.
yeah, practicalities of life.
That's true.
Yeah. People move on.
That's true. What about you, Pat?
I really enjoyed it. Aberglasney, tell us who sold it and how it got into the hands of who's in charge of it now.
Yeah, let's do a bit more of information about that. Right. So this is. So just get my little notes up here. I'm open to that. So right. So here we go. Let's go to Aberglasney was commandeered at the outbreak of World War II, becoming a mobile laundry for the RAOC, which I don't know what that means because I'm just reading through my notes. As the build-up to D-Day occurred, the house was used as a holding station for troops of the U.S. Army, which included the sparring partner of Joe Louis, Top Sergeant Dawson. I'm just reading my notes. A stray Luftwaffe bomb fell on the property after a raid on Swansea Dock in a field nearby. After the end of World War II and the death of Marianne, the owner, in 1939, the descendant of a certain Decima Dorothy Rice, Eric Evans, and his young family took up residence. But on his death in 1950, aged 30, the family trustees decided the property was not economic and hence decided to sell it. In 1955, the estate was broken up, with tenant farmers acquiring their rented land while the house and farm was bought by a lawyer known as David Charles. The house remained unoccupied. That's the clue. Used occasionally for dances and balls, allowing the damp and decay that had set in. A further sale in 1977 reduced the size of the surrounding lands, in part to fund what became a short-lived effort to restore what was now a vandalized property. That was subject to regular architectural theft, so people were going in and nicking things. When the owners joined this effort by trying to sell the portico legally via Christie's auctioneers, the Welsh office stepped in with a full prosecution to preserve the listed building. So they weren't allowed to.
Somebody stole it.
No,
Somebody came overnight and stole the portico, and then months later it turned up with Christie's for sale in an auction.
Well, apparently my notes tell me it was the owners who put it up for auction. But anyway, whoever put it for auction, it basically the Welsh office stepped in and said, "Look, you know, we want to stop this happening." And then they set up the Aberglasney Restoration Trust. You've got archaeological excavations. It's been on a TV. You've got the walled gardens. And it's a wonderful site to visit today. And on that note, Ellen can tell us a little bit more because she visited the site.
Yeah, who owns it now?
It's owned by the Aberglasney Restoration Trust.
Oh, right. Okay. I've been there. It's great.
You have been there, and I'm
Yeah,
sure.
they got a
Go on, Ellen.
room.
What's that again?
Oh, I just said they have a special little herbarium with lots of orchids and pretty things in the part of the building that's fallen apart. They put a garden area inside, sort of. Amazing.
It's a lovely site. And Ellen, you've got your last say on this.
Yeah, it's well worth a visit. It was really lovely. And there's all sorts of bits, open gardens and borders and greenhouses and that. It's lovely. And the house is amazing.
It is amazing. It is amazing. So what we're gonna do next week, I will tell you the topic for next week. Next week, we're gonna be doing churches part 2.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So we're going to be doing churches part 2, and I have found my Bible of churches, which is Lost Churches of Wales and the Marches. So that's what we're going to be doing next week. And you might even be told about the Lost Church of St. Athan. And what I might do is visit St. Mary's Church at Cymru in Cardiff. So that'll be a rather interesting one for us to sort of look at. So we've got all these interesting ones, and it's just which ones to pick actually. So we might do more than just 6 or 7 next week. So anyone got any other questions before we finish?
At Dunraven, you were talking about Dunraven. Inside the walled garden of Dunraven, there's a medlar tree.
Yeah, the medlar tree, yes.
And I love medlars, but you don't see them at all nowadays. The only time I saw them is when we were on a visit to Glastonbury, and they were on sale outside of a shop, and I bought some there.
Have you planted them in your garden?
I've never seen them on sale anywhere around in the area.
In Pwllgwyngyllgoch, they've got a medlar tree which fruits. So when it fruits this year, I'll get some for you to see if you can plant. You can get plants from them.
Oh, right. That'll be good. Yeah,
I didn't.
Yeah, well done.
What is a medlar tree?
Agatha Christie's grandson's house.
What is
Because
a
the medlar you don't eat until it's gone rotten.
Yeah, you've got to bleach them, haven't you?
Well, you just wait until they go brown.
Yeah, so they're rotting. Yeah.
They're rotting, that's right. Yeah.
Are they apple trees?
Pat's asking what a medlar tree is.
Well, no, it's not an apple tree. It's a separate tree altogether.
And it grows little fruits called medlars?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, never heard of it.
So
No,
well, okay then. Okay, what I'm going to do, I've got an image for you all to look at. So let's just see if we can.
They're ready about October, November, the fruit.
Oh.
The medlar tree cultivated since Roman times, apparently.
Oh.
And because my computer is extremely slow, what we'll do, we're going to screen share this last thing, and then we're going to come back, and then we'll all say goodbye together. So we'll just where is my images? Medlar. There we go. Just this little image. As you're interested,
yes.
Can you see the images of the medlar?
Not yet.
Oh,
there
Yeah.
it is.
Oh, yes.
Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
that's them.
Yeah. Whoa.
So you've got to wait for it to go rotten, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
God. Oh.
We always had them, you see, around October.
October. Huh.
Medlar trees, eh?
You eat them with cheese. Have them with cheese.
Cheese.
Oh, we
Okay.
used to have just to eat them anyway, but yes. Yes, it'd be very nice with cheese.
Isn't the skin really tough?
Well, you let them rot. They're bleached or something, is it? What's the word?
Yeah.
Blet.
Bletted, yeah.
That is it. Ah, right.
On that note, folks, Pat, did you want to say one last word?
If it's rotten, I don't think it would taste very good.
It does. They're gorgeous. They're lovely. I said they were
Right.
out for sale in Glastonbury.
Exactly.
Yes.
You say so.
Like that.
So on that note, folks, I will either see you tomorrow, I will see you Friday, next Wednesday, or or Saturday, even on Saturday. On Saturday, by the way, we're doing the ghost myths and legends, the ghost stories of Barry, which I've never done because I've avoided it like the plague. And seeing that there's a story about cholera, it was quite appropriate. On that note, I'm going to say goodnight to Peter, Jill, Ellen, Rosamond, Goff, Pat, Del, and Pam. I'll see you all soon. Thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Night, all. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
Night, night, everybody. Good night.
Very
Good night.
good. Thank you. Good night.
No, no, no,
Night.
no, 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 no.
Right.
Bye.
Croeso, diolch yn fawr i chi. Dida, nosta chi.